Welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach, and up next, listener questions about long runs during maintenance, shorts versus tights, and marathon speed. After that, World of Running updates about sub-4, high schooler, coffee clothes, and more. Welcome back. Glad to be talking into your ears again. And while we're doing it today, answering your questions, because it's the best episode of the month, the Q&A episode. And we will get to all of your questions here shortly. But in case you have more or failed or forgot to ask in good time for this episode, you can ask anytime by going to atozrunning.com/question. Any questions about running, training, life related to running, training, or other things, ask away. And if we have answers, we'll give them.
We've loved in the last couple of weeks going to races and meeting some of you in
Yeah, we
real
didn't
life.
love it before, but in the last couple of weeks,
No, just
things have
because we
changed.
were at races the last couple of weeks, Zach. Rivertown, and then she runs in Grand Rapids. That was really fun. And I was able to meet Sabrina, a listener, at the start line. So thanks for saying hi, Sabrina.
Excellent.
Hope your race went well. It was nice connecting with her on social media afterwards. So that was cool, too.
That's a good strategy. So, Sabrina, once the race started, did you start talking to Andy to try to get her distracted so she would
Well, I
underperform or
was
something?
very grateful. I met a new friend while I was running the race because she and I were running together for most of the entire race. Her name's Kendra, and we were able to talk, and I think it helped us both to be able to occasionally converse and not have to be running the race alone. So we did have we had bikes, even though we were number 2 and 3 in the race. They had a bike with us, which I really appreciated, by the way.
Okay, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I traditionally refer to the person next to me in a race as my enemy. We're trying to destroy one another.
She was very helpful to me.
Sure.
It was good.
Up
It was
until
my
the moment where she destroyed you.
That's true. Well,
And
she
yet
did.
you
She
call
did.
her friend.
Yeah, it helped me out, so I can't complain. It was good. Speaking of races, if you're looking to get more of those in the schedule, we do have a code for Riverbank Run, and it's lowercase RBR, uppercase A to Z 23, and that's for 10% off. Again, that's lowercase RBR, uppercase ATOZ 23, and I'll put that at AtoZrunning.com as well, so you don't have to remember that.
Yeah, you're going to have a good time trying to remember which letters are uppercase and lowercase. So go to the website or certainly find us. And if you aren't sure, send it in a question.
Yeah, send it in a question. Or we can
Comment.
just, yeah.
Anything.
Any way you want to get a hold of us, we can give you that code, and that's for 10% off.
Speaking of ways you want to get a hold of us, we've got a slew of fascinating questions to answer for you here. So now is probably a great time to get right on to it. Got a slew of questions here for you that are going to cover a wide range of topics, which is the best way to do it. A little bit of everything. Some clothes, some training things, some I'm not training for something, but I need some ideas things, and a little bit more.
Well, let's kick it off with that last one. Margaret from Michigan asked about long runs during maintenance cycles. She says, if you're not training for anything in particular, should we be running 2 to 2.5 hour long runs? How long should they actually be for a maintenance cycle?
So she's been listening well and closely to us lately, talking about these 2 to 2.5 hour long runs, which are pretty much our constant recommendation for all runners pretty much all the time, or at least most of the time. So what about if I don't have a specific race on the schedule? What do you think?
I think that if you want to and you're feeling good and you have the time for it, and that's something you enjoy, to do that.
That's a fair and simple perspective. Effective. Now, if you're looking for in this question, Margaret, like what's the best thing to do, then that question has to be answered with a little bit more context. Like, why are you running right now, and what do you want out of running right now? So as Andy said, if you got the time, go for it. Why not? If the reason you're not training for a specific race is because like life constraints are super heavy, or you're having trouble staying healthy, or some of those kinds of things, that might change the recommendation. But let's assume you're just in between things right now, and you just haven't kind of figured out exactly what's next, but you're still running and training. my assumption in that sense is you still, as a runner, want to be able to perform at a high level when it's time to perform, or when you have a performance eventually on the schedule. And so the answer then, as always, becomes, well, what could I do right now that would best set me up for future success, which is always the concept of training as a runner. And the answer there is, do long runs.
Yeah, but if you're feeling like you're taking a down season because it's too much running, then just see what you want to do. I mean, have a long run, do a long run, but whatever is best and fits best into your schedule.
And that kind of feeds into when we talk with runners about what we call unstructured time, which is a thing that we think all runners should do from time to time. Our general recommendation is at least once a year for 2 to 4 to 8 weeks, whatever you need, but certainly for at least a few weeks, have some unstructured time where you're not trying to follow a plan. Now, we've talked to so many runners who say, I hate unstructured time and I need a plan. And part of why we will still try to coerce you into some unstructured time at some point or another is because it's actually a bad thing, that compulsory sense we have for, I have to have the structure, and without it, I can't thrive or be successful. We don't want to be that dependent on external control factors. Now, of course, most of us are following plans most of the time, and we're still going to continue with that general perspective. But what does unstructured time ultimately look like? Well, usually the point of it is for a kind of physical and mental break from things. Mm-hmm. And so if a 2 to 2.5 hour long run sounds like thrilling to you during unstructured time or maintenance cycles because you just really want to get out there and enjoy it and that kind of thing, then you go for it. It's certainly not going to hurt. It can only help as long as you're healthy. But at the same time, if that same run, when you're halfway through, starts to feel really laborious and no longer interesting, maybe you cut it shorter than planned. And that's the beauty of unstructured time. Mm-hmm. You just do what you would like for a bit.
But is there a training benefit to do long runs? Yes.
Always.
Mm-hmm. Next up, Bryn from Michigan. We're talking about reciprocal efforts on the treadmill. So
this one is a multi-layered question. Bryn actually had kind of two questions in one. And we thought, let's answer both of them. Why not? But the crux of the question is, she is preparing for a marathon at the time of asking, about 6 weeks away. And in those final 6 weeks, and I'm sure you've heard us say this now several times because we've been talking about it a lot lately, that's when things start to get dynamic. And so Bryn, listening to us talk about that, is starting to wonder, well, what should I be doing during this time to make sure? And her question comes from two layers. One is she's still spending a lot of time on the treadmill at that point in training, not necessarily by choice all the time. It's just the most likely option in a given moment, which many of us are familiar with. But at the same time, she is feeling kind of that itch for, I want to make sure that I've got some good quality intensity involved in this experience between the last several weeks of race training. So if that's true, which it is true for all of us, we need to be doing some of that kind of stuff. What would it look like and how to leverage the treadmill? So here's the question specifically. I want to run 8:34-minute mile in the marathon, which of course immediately begs the question of, how exactly should we execute races to best achieve our desired results? But that's not the question at the moment, so we'll address that one another time. What speed do I need to set my treadmill to in order to simulate that kind of speed outdoors? So she's trying to create a kind of goal pace workout, but finding that treadmills are not the same as running outside, and it doesn't feel the same when she sets the treadmill to that 8:34 pace, for instance. So the question here, I understand that treadmill running is not the same as outdoor and not as legitimate as outdoor running, certainly in terms of physiological training stimulus. That is true. So what alterations need to be made on the treadmill to simulate the same kind of pace and effort? Fascinating question. She has been looking for this, Googling about, as it were, and has not been able to find concrete answers.
That's because treadmills are tuned differently.
It's because concrete answers
And
don't exist to that question.
It is very difficult because it also depends on your mechanics, how it's going to affect you indoor versus outdoor.
Yes.
There's a lot of variables going on.
That is true. So if that's true, you can't find like a generic here's what you should do and it's going to be perfect. But there are some ways we can tinker with our treadmill running experience that gets it closer to an outdoor running experience. And the first one that we're going to say is don't try to set it to a specific pace and marry yourself to that pace because it's not trustworthy. You can't know for sure if that pace on a treadmill is going to represent the same type of experience outdoor running. And so you got to find instead what it feels like. You got to do it by effort, Bryn. You got to find that comfortable range that this is kind of the amount of effort it takes for me to run what I'd like to run for the marathon. Figure out what that is. And maybe you have to do that more with some outdoor running stuff first, where you can kind of get a natural sense how much I'm exerting myself. And then you have to get really familiar with that amount of exertion, with that degree of exertion. And then on a treadmill, you can find that somewhat. Again, it's not perfect, but that kind of creates your range of where I should set the paces. And then the thing you tinker with is incline. So in outdoor running, we have two forces working against us, among others, but two forces working against us that are not present on the treadmill. You have air resistance, because in a treadmill, you're not actually moving forward, so there's no air resistance. And then you have ground resistance, because when your foot hits the ground, you have to then push along it. So you're pushing your body off the ground. On a treadmill, the belt is moving, so there is no push force for forward momentum. Instead, in essence, what you're doing is you're just trying to get your foot back off the treadmill as quickly as possible. So, of course, the dynamic is not perfectly that. There is still amount of pushing so that you don't fall off the back of the treadmill. But you're really not using the same kinds of ground force mechanics on a treadmill as you are outside. And that's why they're so different. So then you have to kind of find a range of set the treadmill up to like 1, 2, 3% incline and kind of see how that feels. You'll get to a point where you obviously feel the incline and it's kind of like you're running up a hill. That's a little too much. But there's also a point where it's like set it at 0, then set it at 2%, then set it back down to 0, then set it at 3%, then back down to 0. And as you do that, you'll start to realize that it feels way more natural at a certain small percent than it does at 0. And that's entirely because since you have no forward momentum happening, you're running much more upright on a treadmill, then the angle of impact and the angle of push-off are different than they are on the ground outside. So you can get a little bit closer to that with some incline tinkering.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that she asked the question, though, because I do think that often we do try to match what we've been doing outside, even in a general sense, to our treadmill running. And I'll just give my word of warning. I was feeling really good on a treadmill, and I ran with it. I ran with it, and I went far, and I went fast, and I thought I was feeling good until I wasn't after the fact. And I ended up with that's what actually aggravated me for my I already had a labrum tear, but it aggravated the labrum tear that I then had to get repaired. So I just want to give a word of warning, just because you can run really fast on a treadmill, it might not be the best choice because it could be a little dangerous. So it's my word of warning.
Yeah. Yep. Andy ruins herself on treadmills. Actually, a fair bit. And one day we might learn from it. But I'm the exact opposite then. I feel terrible on a treadmill. Like I could run 1 to 2 minutes slower per mile than I normally would in easy runs and feel like I'm working on a treadmill. So for me, the opposite is true, where I have to be willing to be a little bit less comfortable than normal in order to get to a closer kind of range of exertion, because my perception is just messed up. So we have to kind of learn our nuances when it comes to treadmill running to really truly optimize them. So what it comes down to here is that you really are not going to be able to optimize a treadmill workout for specific race prep types of goals. It's just not a good idea because it's so deceptive. But also it's not the same type of thing as the outdoor running anyway, and so it's just never going to really truly be able to prepare you in the same sense for that level of precision.
Right, but it's good for training, and it's a great tool to have in your toolbox.
It's a good fitness building vehicle. It is not a good race attuning resource.
Okay.
Maybe that's a better differentiation.
Yeah.
So then the question became, that was what Bryn's follow-up to it was there. Then she said, what can I do to get this, to feel confident in my speed preparation for the marathon? And the answer there is, if you have to use the treadmill for that type of stuff, then we recommend a simple kind of fartlicking, where you're not paying any attention to paces, but you're just trying to get it moving faster, slower, and faster and slower, some incline, some flat, all that type of stuff. Just because that level of neuromuscular interaction and exchange can be valuable and will certainly be helpful without trying to like have it be too precise. And then with the precision type of stuff, you should do that outside. You really should if you can. And it doesn't have to be more than once or twice a week. And then you should do some things like some shorter, hard efforts, like a time trial type of thing,
which we'll talk about next week.
Which we will
Stay tuned.
talk about next week. What does it look like in the final stages of preparation for your race? And then also, it's good to do some short, fast stuff at some point. But if you're training for a marathon and you're 4 or 6 weeks out or something, you really don't need short, fast stuff. You might not feel like you have a ton of snap and pop in your legs like you would if you were doing short interval workouts. But you don't need a ton of snap and pop in your legs for a marathon. And if you spend too much time on that, you're costing yourself in terms of things you could be doing otherwise. So our recommendation there is do some long hill intervals. It's great for building strength in your legs. It's great for helping increase muscle recruitment, so you have a little bit more in your toolbox in terms of muscle fibers available to you. And uphill repeats tend to be demanding, but we recover fairly quickly from them because they're harder than it's harder to do than they are straining your body.
This wasn't in our notes, but as you were reading the question, I realized that a piece of it wasn't exactly answered. And she was asking how she can feel confident to run the marathon that she wants to run. And this is a question that all athletes ask themselves, a question that every runner who toes the line is wondering. How can I feel confident? And the confidence isn't in the pace or the end result that you are really, truly desiring, but it's in running the best that you can for that given day. And the confidence that you're going to want to have is in your ability to measure your effort to the duration of the race and think about the preparations that you've done, how you have put all this work into your marathon training, and really trust your intuition during the race that you can have a really good day, no matter what that day brings and what the variables are thrown your way.
Insofar as you have prepared well. And this is where so I'll say the thing that Andy will then probably cringe at, but not everyone listening to this should be confident in their marathon potential, because not everyone is preparing fittingly for a good marathon experience. And what this comes down to is there's only 2 ways to go about it. You either go about it as best as you can. Obviously, we all have different constraints and such. You go about it as best as you can, and you're prepared as well as you can be for it. And then you're confident in, I can do as much as I was able to prepare for, and that's all I have to worry about. Or you are shortchanging yourself and are missing the side of the marathon is a grueling experience, demands much of us, and we must prepare adequately so that we can endure that well. And the reason I say that at all is because there's a lot of there's a lot of attempts to engage with something like a marathon without necessarily doing due diligence to try to prepare well for it. And that is a very difficult thing to do. It puts us in a really difficult situation come race day to try to engage with 26 miles of running for hours of this activity that our systems aren't well prepared to handle. So don't put yourself in that situation. As Andy says, you can be confident in your race by preparing well for it. And you don't have to worry about the specifics, because the specifics are not really the thing that makes you prepared for the race. what makes you prepared for the race is putting in that time and work over long periods of time. Now, this question, a nice,
very different.
Nice pivot. I like how we have very different questions, one from another. Travis asked, and specifically in terms of apparel, asked about shorts versus half tights. And so his comment, as so many of us have experienced, is constant issue of chafing, as he said, with normal running shorts. And he's looking at wearing short tights, otherwise more familiarly in our experience known as half tights.
Or short pants.
I depending on the company, people call these things so many different names that it's very difficult to actually find unless you just already know what you're looking for. Go to Running Warehouse and search their stuff, because at least it's all organized better and more clearly. Not that I say you should buy everything on Running Warehouse, but at least find it there first. So anyway.
Or go into a store like Gazelle.
Yeah.
So you can actually feel the materials and try stuff on. I know that the
you've
natural
got access
inclination,
to a specialty running store, that can be helpful.
I mean, it is so difficult with something like your running apparel, because you can see something online and then when you get it, it's not even the same texture, quality, or thickness that you thought it was based on the photograph.
Well, or the descriptions. It's crazy. These descriptions run the gamut in things they claim that are untrue about their apparel. Like
Loosely.
High compression. And then it's like the super flimsy, flabby material that, barely feels like it's got any tightness to it. Or they'll say things like, they'll have like this thickness gauge, which is of course entirely subjective to their own measure. Has nothing to do with like a true amount of thickness. And this thickness gauge is like, this is super warm. And then you get it and it's like, that's not any warmer than anything else. It's just a normal material. So anyway, the point is, yes, I agree with Andy on that one. If you've not experienced an item or a type of item, or especially an item by that brand, then go somewhere where you can like hold it and look at it or even try it on.
Yeah. Especially if you are getting in the final stages before a race and you don't have much time and you need to get a couple training runs in it before you race in it.
That's the other side of it. So, Travis, your question is because of a chafing issue that already exists with running shorts. So, the rule about apparel and chafing. Well, let me just finish his question then, because he said, do you have any recommendations? He has searched for these types of things, and he comes across biking shorts. He comes across base layer shorts. Like, it's just all these different types of things. And you're right. Neither of those are things you want for this situation. But the goal is to prevent chafing without having to like use the anti-chafing balms or all of that kind of stuff, right? So, first rule, everything chafes. It's a rule of apparel. There is no such thing as a garment that does not chafe. And it's all circumstantial. So a garment will chafe one day and then not another. And it's the exact same garment. And you ran the same amount of time both times, right? How is that possible? A garment will chafe that has never chafed before and then will never chafe again. How does that happen? So all of this is to remember there's two things involved in chafing predominantly more than anything else. One is moisture and the other is movement and how you're moving. Okay, so the more moisture there is, like humidity, sweat, and all of that kind of stuff, the more likely chafing will occur. To the degree that if you are racing, assuming that you're sweating a little bit more because you're running hard, and if it's not freezing cold, where you're really just not sweating at all because it's so cold, chances are you will chafe no matter what you're wearing. Now, the movement side of it is another layer to this, because depending on how you're moving, so if you're running like slower, easier, you're not moving quite as much, and you'll wear this garment and be like, this is perfect. I've never chafed in this before in all of my training runs. And then I wear it in a race and it's awful because your running mechanic's a little different if you're trying to run faster or something like that, right? That happens. And then on the other side of it is depending on how the garment moves with you, that may or may not influence chafing. So
you just told me a whole lot of nothing.
What I'm telling you is everything chafes. But
I don't know if that's true. Do you
it
think
is
it?
I guarantee it. You can find a circumstance with every garment you wear that in which that circumstance then it will chafe. But But that's not to say all hope is not lost. There are certain things that are designed better than other things, and there are certain things that are going to work better for you than other things. For instance, simply put, with something like half tights or short tights or however you want to label them, they tend to have one of two structural designs. The one is the seam down the middle, and the other is the seams that wrap slightly outside of the middle and around your legs, as opposed to running down the middle, right? Now, depending on you, not the garment, one of those two is more likely to chafe than the other. And it's just super subjective by individuals. And so I have sworn by certain half tights over the years and then recommended them to a few people. And it was like a 50-50 toss-up. Some of them, they were awesome. Some of them, they were the worst possible, right?
Oh, dear.
And so that does happen. So I will not go down the road of telling you, here's a brand that definitely works better than others. But instead, we'll say, here are some things to look for, some things to try out and all of that. The first is, chances are, if for any runner, if you're wearing a compression type of garment, tights, half tights, any of that kind of stuff, you probably also want some kind of base layer under it. Because most of the time, compression types of garments can't be structurally designed in such a way like undergarments can that are more protective. You usually get one or the other. And so you're layering in some extent there. And so you start with, you got to find a base layer that is as thin and not chafing as possible, because you don't want like a whole bunch of extra material either. And then you find a half tight garment that you can wear over top of that moves really well, that isn't terribly thick but also isn't too thin, because if they're too thin, then they tend to move more the longer you work out. So if you're running a marathon, for instance, in half tights, they like ride up or they slide down at the hips if they're thinner. So you need something a little bit thicker that holds its structure better. And types of material are going to matter there. And there's so many things. So I race in half tights about half the time, even in the summer, even when the weather's hotter. And it's not because of chafing. It's actually, I don't know if I can explain exactly why sometimes I decide one or the other.
Well,
usually it's temperature.
Usually choose the half tights. Or
yeah.
They're not half tights. They're like long 9-inch
They're
shorts.
called half tights.
Okay.
But whatever the case may be, the length of that matters too. So I look for the 9-inch ones. They usually have 9, 7, and 5. Those are the three sizes. For men's, it's usually 7 and 5 or 7 and 9. Every once in a while, you'll find a 5. But I would stick with the longer ones most of the time. But it's also going to depend on the shape of your quadriceps and where they bulge or not in terms of which 7-inch or 5-inch you'd like. So you got to try these things on. That being said, when I wear half tights and the ones that I wear, I look for brands that I'm familiar with, and I almost never try anything other than that. And when I have, it's often gone poorly. But I look for things like the main, Nike, Brooks, those types of things. They tend to just be much more consistent in their quality and in their structural designs, all of that. So that's the best I can say. We could certainly start recommending specific items and know for sure that there's a high chance that it just won't work for you the same way as it does for someone else.
Interesting combos. All right. So next up, this is a unique question from Rachel. She's asking us about our personal race reflections about our races recently.
Okay. So the goal here being to just tell you what we've been doing, or
I'll read what she wrote.
Okay. All right.
I know you don't share about your own running endeavors often, but I think you and Zach should really share a segment on your race experience insight. Did it go as expected or planned? Was there a lesson or something that you could pivot, etc.? And she said specifically that she enjoyed reading your Bayshore article or watching the video.
Did she watch the video or read? Was there an article?
I think that one was actually from a few years ago.
The article was, but there was a video from last year.
Yeah.
We've toyed with trying to do more of that type of content. As you can imagine, it's time consuming, and we just haven't quite settled on the way we would want to go about it if we were to do so. I can't say personally that I'm terribly thrilled with the amount of content out there about like, here's what I ate for breakfast this morning, and it was yummy. And here's what I did.
You're so cynical.
I am. I'm terribly cynical.
I enjoy seeing people's
But I
lives.
also find that the thing that I want to do for all of you listening is give you things that make a difference in your endeavors. And it's possible that the individual personal anecdotes could from time to time, but that's just simply where we haven't pursued it more heavily.
Well, let's indulge.
Okay,
all
indulge,
right?
Rachel.
So, Zach.
What?
Did Rivertown races go as you expected?
Kind.
And what were you thinking before the race?
Kind of. So, Andy, did she runs go as you expected?
It went better than I expected.
Great.
Yeah, because, excuse me, coming back and having not run a race in a really long time, I had some overarching hopes for it. One was that I'd be able to run without having there be ramifications from trying to have more aggressive effort than usual. And I, in the back of my head, had some hopes that maybe I could run close to let's see, how do I put this? Because we don't talk about pace much here. Be able to run harder than what my marathon effort would be right now. So,
no, so here's the thing. We don't talk about pace much here, but you want to think about pace still when you go out and race. So you have to give us an honest reflection,
okay.
Andy. Andy was thinking about pace.
So
contrary to one particular coach's constant suggestions to her pre and post race.
So I'd been running my steadies just under like 6:50 pace. And so I was like, well, I should be able to run 6:50 pace or faster in my half marathon, because
that's a different day.
It is a different day. But that's what I was hoping for on a good day, to run at least what I could run for a steady, because it should be a harder effort for the half marathon. And so that was kind of my baseline. I was hoping to run under 1:30, and I ran 1:24. There
you go. That hopefully indulges Rachel's questions. All right.
Zach, please.
I answered the question.
No, you didn't.
I said kind of.
Okay, I want you to elaborate, please.
I don't have any elaborations.
Or something that you learned from your race?
No, but that's largely because I wasn't really trying to learn anything.
Isn't that what you say about like trying to learn when you do races? No?
Yeah, sure. Just in that one in particular, I was coming off an injury, and so I was just trying to give a good, even, strong effort.
Okay.
And I felt good about the effort, and
good.
And it was mostly just testing those shoes. That's probably the most substantial thing I was doing. I was wearing a pair of shoes I've never worn before, planning to wear them for a marathon. So I had to wear them in something else first. And
were you planning to go out to try to win the race like you did, or?
I had no preconceived notions.
So you weren't there for racing?
Sure. I'm always there for racing. I don't run a race without a thought about racing. That doesn't mean I'm always trying to win the race. It kind of depends on the degree of effort I'm intending to give. Mm-hmm. But so racing in general for me is an exercise in how am I feeling and how much harder can I push? Every race, no matter what the distance, no matter where I am in a training cycle, how am I feeling right now? How much harder can I push? And if that answer is also aligning with the nature of the competitiveness of the race, then I might be trying to win it as well. And if it's not, then I'm not. And I can tell you with clarity that at the beginning of the race, I was not at all thinking I was like going to try to beat the guys ahead of me yet, because they took off quite a bit. Well, what actually happened was the race started and someone started talking to me, and I'm trying to remember who it was. So if you're listening and you were that person, I thought that was swell. That was loads of fun. We were chatting for a little bit. But as such, it also was, I was more focused on the conversation than I was of like running yet. And so I don't know how many, it wasn't long, a minute or 2 or 3 goes by. And then I'm like, all right, okay, now let's settle in and find a comfortable rhythm. And I looked up and those guys were way up there. And I was like, well, it doesn't really change anything I'm going to do anyway. So I was all good. I went about it. But then as these things go, I find kind of the comfortable amount of exertion that I want to do for now. And as I get into that rhythm, then I kind of look about myself and get a sense of, well, where are other people, and where are they? And at that point, I was trailing a couple of guys who were quite a ways ahead and wasn't really gaining on them. And so I just kind of settled in and waited to see what would continue to happen. After a while, one of them came back. After a while longer, it was clear that I was slightly gaining on the other one. Like I was basically watching him like get a little bit closer every so often, and it was kind of hard to know for sure. But I figured if I was still feeling comfortable come late stages of the race, then I would try to push and see if I could beat him. Remember the thing, how am I feeling and how much harder can I push? Those are the two questions I'm asking myself at all times. So then we ended up getting, I caught up to him. We ended up right next to each other about halfway through the race, ran together for a while. Happens to be that I also know him, so we chatted for a bit because he's my enemy. And you sometimes want to trick your enemies by chatting with them. No, I'm kidding, Mike. And so that was nice. That was fun. I don't know that I started to accelerate quite yet, but putting a little bit of pressure on. And then it was sometime around mile 10 where it's like, okay, I've got enough left that I could dial it up a little bit here and see what that feels like, and then finish the race. That's it.
All right.
So kind of is the answer. Expectations? I don't know that I had any. I just kind of wanted to see how I feel.
Yeah, and that's what these races leading into goal races are really good for. It's trying to see what an effort feels like Zach was saying, testing some shoes. For me, I tested some nutrition and I didn't like it. So that was a good learning experience.
Yep.
So I'll have to try to put those pieces together in the next couple of weeks so that I can be prepared for my marathon. But I think that it's all having goals that supersede of course, the time goal. But also defining success as some learning experiences as Rachel insightfully asked within her question, what things did you learn? How are you going to pivot? Those were really insightful questions. So yeah. I think
I'm giving you a hard time, Rachel. I'm doing it on purpose, but
of course you are. But I do think that those are great questions that Rachel brought up for each of us to be asking ourselves when we do these races. So I'm gonna ask again: did the race go as I expected it would? If it does, why? If it does not, why? Those are great learning experiences. And then, is there something that you learned that you're going to have to pivot for the next race?
And in the wise words of a teacher whom I highly respect, not everything has to be deeply meaningful all the time. It's quite exhausting when it is. And so there may be a time where you want to run a race and you don't care to learn anything at all from it, and you don't care to pay much attention to expectations at all. You just want to go out there and do the thing and enjoy it. And that's fine too. But these are good questions as well when you're trying to especially prepare for an upcoming big goal.
Some of us like to dive into racing and to dive into all the details, which we're going to do next also in the world of running. First up, some A to Z runner shout outs, starting with Craig in yet another marathon.
And a good one.
A great one.
Well done, Craig.
Way to go, Craig. And then Hannah, she paced the half, and that was at She Runs. And then Joanna ran her first 10K at She Runs.
Love it.
Love it. Sarah ran the half marathon at She Runs, and Alyssa ran a half marathon PR at She Runs. So that's exciting. And then Chad is in the middle of Cocodona 250.
Just about in the middle, depending on when you're listening to this.
250.
250 miles.
Yes, with lots of elevation and lots of fun to be had. Can't wait to hear about his adventures.
We'll let you know how that goes next time. Yeah, well, speaking of adventures, just adding more names to the big lists. We've got these high schoolers just running crazy right now. And so you've heard us say it. I can't remember exactly what the numbers were the last time we said it, that in the boys' high school in the U.S., there have been, in the last 4 years, quadruple the number of people running sub 4 in the mile than ever before those last 4 years.
Insane.
It's really something. Well, we add one more to the list here. Now, this is Rocky Hansen. I think he's from Virginia. Rocky Hansen has been knocking on the door of a sub 4 minute mile for quite some time.
Yeah.
In fact, as a junior, I believe he was last year, ran 4 flat .7 ish. And so, under a second off.
Yeah.
That's rough.
Well, he did it again earlier this year.
And then again indoors.
Yeah. And it was like 4.8.
Yep. And he's run 401.1 or something.
Oh, my goodness.
So, like, here he is, time after time, just barely missing it. And you're running out of time because as a high schooler, so to run sub 4 in college is like you're decent. You're good.
You're a good miler.
You're good, but there's a lot of sub 4 milers in college. But to run sub 4 in high school is legendary. And so it's like, you got to do it. And then he did.
He did.
He ran 3:59.56 in a race with a bunch of collegians and beat them all, too. So well done there. Just kind of strutting his stuff in front of the old guys. Puts him, by the way, that time puts him now 15th all time on the U.S. boys high school mile list.
So if those collegians are old, we're ancient.
Oh, yeah.
I look at college runners now and I'm like, wow, I'm feeling old. But that is an incredible achievement for Rocky Hansen, which he has an awesome name, by the way. I just wanted to put that out there. Rocky Hansen.
Pretty good.
He sounds so cool.
Rocky Hansen is almost as good a runner name as Chase.
Chase.
All right. Next up.
On to coffee in clothes.
Why? That sounds
I know.
dirty.
It sounds delicious to me, but I don't know.
Remember when I told you that I didn't like the smell of coffee?
And
you
very,
smelled
very
like
offended.
coffee all the time?
I worked at a coffee shop and I would grind coffee beans quite often for my job. And Zach told me he's like, I hate coffee. And I even hate the smell of it. And I'm like, I smell like coffee all the time. I felt really...
Imagine
badly
now
about that.
wearing coffee clothes and how much more I would just hate the smell of it.
I wonder what they do smell like, though. Exactly.
Hopefully not coffee.
This is from Outside Magazine, an article about this. So you can read about this delicious idea. No, you can't taste it, but spent coffee beans in clothes. So these are used coffee grounds that are being recycled and used in clothing, specifically in athletic garb. It's a deodorizer. It dries twice as fast as cotton. There's natural UV protection. It's naturally heat retentive and bacterial resistant.
So
there's a lot of advantages. But
so how are you getting that coffee into your clothes?
Okay, this is another interesting thing. Right now, they're not adding any dyes or anything, so they're just like the color of coffee.
Yeah.
So I think that's a little interesting.
We're talking about a blend material now. This is a classic like synthetic blend. You're not getting a 100% coffee t-shirt. And so it might be like what they're doing is they're essentially taking these coffee grounds and through a pressure and temperature process, they're blending them with an existing fiber like polyester or something. And so then the polyester fibers are coffee infused, you might say. And then they blend that with like a cotton to create your t-shirt. And so I don't know how much this influences color. You know how they're like you get like silver infused materials and like those are kind of semi shiny from it.
I don't know. They said they like the unique color that the coffee clothing
I don't know.
yields.
Brown.
So we'll see. Okay.
You're nice.
I mean,
brown.
I'm interested in this. I'm a big fan of coffee, so
well, until they get blue or black, we're never putting it on an A to Z running shirt because that brown wouldn't jive so well with A to Z running colors.
But at least, I've spent a lot of my life spilling coffee on my clothes. At least this would be like
you wouldn't notice it as much.
More intentional usage. Maybe I was just fashion forward.
Okay, you can claim whatever you want. All right, so next up on the list here is another really interesting one. This comes from the Run Smarter podcast, and the physio guy who hosts it talks a lot about strength training and general strength and mobility. And in this particular episode, he was addressing a study that was conducted with marathoners doing strength training.
Shout out to Josh Motter who sent this.
Josh Motter is
Zach.
the one who shared it with me. So yes, I did not find this on my own. Thanks, Josh. Okay, so here's the jive. This study took, and this is not a huge major thing. It was like 28 marathoners. So take it Take it as it is. 28 is not a representative sample of a population of humans who run. But it's an interesting conclusion all the same. So they put them through 2 times per week of strength regimen for 6 weeks, which, as we often talk about, if you want to see the results of some strength training, you need to do it for a minimum of 2 to 4 weeks. In this case, 6 weeks is better. So that matters because now they're in a routine for a while. And they gave these groups, they split them into 3 groups, 1 of 3 training regimen with the strength training. And so the first one was combining heavy lifts with low reps and power or plyo exercises, some jump types of things, a couple of different things there. And then the second group had just the heavy lift regimen. And so high weight, low rep lifting. And these are all, I should mention, all the lifting was the same for each group. It was just the amount of weight versus maximum and the amount of reps and rest were the only things that they were adjusting for. So then the third group was the classic. This is where I think most endurance runners' recommendations tend to fall, which is low weight, high rep of these functional running related lifts. Okay. Predictions. What do you think happened as a result? So they studied 7, I think, different areas of effect to try to kind of find out what things were influenced. And it was all sorts of stuff that, like respiration, which you wouldn't expect to be affected by something like this. And so it wasn't, things like that. But then they also specifically were isolating running economy and a 5K time trial test that they would conduct before and after. And so those were the 2 that they pointed to as the areas they saw the most change in, right? And here is the result. They said that one of these groups, or some of these groups, saw an average of 4% performance increase in running economy and 5K time trial test. 4% increase, which, this is a 6-week period of time. For a 4% increase, that's a major return on your investment of 2 strength sessions per week for 6 weeks. That's crazy. So, which one?
The shoes are more.
What's that?
Than 4%.
Well, barely though, and for some people it's not. So now you're talking about the potential to impact.
I was just making a cheeky joke.
Well, actually, he did that. In fact, in the episode, as he specifically said, if Nike can claim 4% on their shoes, we can claim 4% on a 6-week strength program. Which one's going to cost you less? So anyway, you can get both, in fact, because you can wear the shoes and do the strength. So here's how it goes. The ones that saw the benefits were not the lighter weight, higher rep regimens, but the higher weight, low rep strength training. Now we're talking about 3 to 5 reps at a very high percent of your maximum lift for a given, like a squat, a deadlift, those types of things. And specifically in running economy 5K time trial test. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. That's crazy because it goes contrary to what so many people want to recommend for runners.
I do think that people have been recommending that a lot more in the last 5 years.
Well, if they've been reading Lydiard, they have.
Well, Lydiard did suggest that way back.
In the 1950s, in fact, Lydiard started saying, runners, strength? Nah, they don't need that. But if they're going to do that, they should do the heavy stuff. Yeah. He was right.
He was right. And I do think that this has been something that a lot of people have been able to, figure out because that is the recommendation I'm seeing most frequently now. But
yeah, and it makes sense because the area has been researched more and more and is proving out quite conclusively. Now, you're going to see that ad on YouTube from that guy who's like, running is terrible. That one, everyone's seen that ad.
It's my least favorite advertisement, and I get it all the time. He's like, stop running.
Yeah, right.
Stop running.
Because I'm going to listen to your ad.
It's so funny. This is kind of a side note. The 2 most frequent advertisements that I get are 2 of the things I love the most where people are yelling to stop. So one, stop running, that guy. And then the other one is stop drinking coffee.
Yeah, well.
And I just go, hey, but I love it. Both of them. And my goals for running are for running itself, not because I'm looking for body sculpting. So.
Andy, the algorithm is doing that on purpose. It knows you love those things, but we all know that the thing that generates the most amount of interaction in any kind of marketing, advertising, or interactive media is things that enrage us. They're doing it on purpose.
I'm talking about it right now.
So, anyway, he's wrong. Don't stop running.
Don't stop running.
But the thing that he keeps saying is actually right, which is you need to be doing this like strength stuff. That's what's going to help you. Well, it is going to help you as long as you keep running. If you don't keep running, I don't know what you're going to do. All right. Now,
bonus. We have a bonus for you.
We got a bonus.
It's kind of
This
hilarious.
one is funny. So we're going to link to the video. If you're not going to find this as funny as we do probably, but that's why we're telling you about it. So you don't have to go watch it yourself unless you really, really want to. There was an event.
Penn relays.
Penn relays.
Really famous.
Very famous track meet. Been going on for years and years. And one of the things that's unique about the Penn relays, hence the name relays, is they have a number of relays that are uncommon. You don't see these at normal meets and such. So teams will come to this event to do this kind of uncommon thing and have some fun with it, right? It's a blast. Well, in this particular instance, coverage by FlowTrack, by the way, and we have linked to the video if you'd like to watch it, the men's 4x1 mile relay. And so this is a collegiate race, and it's a classic relay. They've got the baton, but each guy runs 1 mile, and then they pass off.
There's a lot of hype around this race. Apparently, many of these, if not several of them, were expected to be able to break an impressive time of 16 minutes on paper.
So averaging sub 4-minute miles for all four, which is, there's a record. I can't remember what it is, but that's it. They were thinking these guys could break the world record. World?
I thought
it was a world record they were potentially going for.
The one that OAC went for?
Yeah, and they missed it too. Yep.
Oh, maybe it wasn't OAC. It was, but
well, OAC did.
OAC.
The Nike guys did. There was a couple of
There's
different
a couple of different
attempts.
groups. Yep. There was like a group of like Oregon alumni.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Okay.
They missed it too.
Okay, so this is something that should have been at least something we could set our sights on, right?
Well, according to the FlowTrack guys, it should have happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what happens. They get to the final leg of the relay, the anchor leg, the person who's going to run the last mile. And at that point, time-wise, they were not far off. They need to be sub 16, average 4 apiece, and they were like 12.0 something, pretty low. And so that's a manageable thing for a miler who can run 3:55 or 3:56 in a mile. They can run fast enough to get that time, right? All these guys have, in fact, or very nearly all of them. So the announcers were just like excited. This is going to happen. And then
it wasn't happening.
It didn't happen.
It wasn't happening.
Because everybody in the race decided they didn't want to run fast. They just wanted to try to win.
They were going to race, yep. And he was so mad. This guy.
He was so.
The commentary.
Both of them, both the commenters.
Saying things like, they decided to jog.
So you got it. We have the progression here of things that they said to these guys. They basically resorted to insulting them as much as they could, as colorfully as they could, while maintaining some amount of decorum. Okay, so go ahead, Andy. They decided to jog. That was the first thing they said. Oh, they decided to jog. Look at this.
You can hear the groans from the crowds. Come on, guys.
Come on, guys. You can hear it. I love it. The groans from the crowd. No, you can't. What is this guy? So then from there he goes, they're 10th to 12th guys on their team. The JV freshmen could run this. And so now it's like, you're running so slow, the freshmen could beat you.
This is my favorite run, though. I don't run too much anymore, but I could be going this pace right now.
Classic commenter move. When you're ticked off with what's happening in the event, you say, I could do this. Everyone says that, right? No. And then from there, it just keeps degrading, and they're just looking for what's the next level down we can go. And he says, we could throw some high school boys out there. They could be looking just fine in this pack.
And then the last one. Is this the last one?
That's the last one.
Makes you wonder if they should have saved their airfare.
Don't even show up was the last one. You guys are so bad. You shouldn't have even come here. Wow.
But it did make for a really exciting 5 in the last
the race itself was actually really fun to watch.
Because they waited so long. It was like a herd of them coming into the finish.
Yeah.
No one was going. So
unbelievable.
Anyway, it was very funny, and it was a race. Sometimes you go for fast time. Sometimes you go to race the people that are there. And in this instance, these guys thought they were going for a fast time. So,
and I just have to say, my only comment aside from the observing the funny things is that a race commenter has one job. Their job is to tell us what's happening in the race, not to tell us what they wish were happening or what should be happening but isn't, but tell us what is happening. And they couldn't do it without their color commentary, at least.
But we're talking about it, so must have done something right.
Oh, it was so funny.
Well, that concludes our episode for today, but we will be back again next week, continuing our series on training periods.
We get to do the best parts now and talk about what it's going to take to get across the finish line on your race in the best way possible, and how you can do some things in training to help with that. That's next, so don't miss it.
Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.